All right, I am Emily Allen, the membership manager at the Tech Interactive, and today our presenter is the Tech Interactive's Safety and Security Operations Manager, Pete Adams. Pete is also a licensed commercial and theatrical pyrotechnician and works with Fireworks and Stage FX America. If you have questions during Pete's presentation, we'd love to answer them. Please post questions you like answered in the Q&A section rather than the chat section. That will help me keep track of the questions when we get to the end of Pete's presentation for the Q&A. But we would also love to see your comments in the chat section. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pete. Welcome, Pete.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this very hot afternoon. So if you saw last year's presentation, this is not going to be the same presentation. We will be diving into the world of theatrical pyrotechnics as well. But before we get started, just a little disclaimer reminder that we have. Next slide, please. The topics covered in this presentation are for obviously educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be attempted or be recreated. Serious bodily harm and or legal issues could result. Please leave it to the licensed professionals. All right, next slide. So we're going to start with what are fireworks and what is a fireworks shell, and we're going to be talking about a commercial shell. Next slide. And in a commercial shell, they're rated at a 1.3 gram explosive, and basically what that means is there's enough composition of black powder and other volatile chemicals contained into this shell. And we'll get into the makeup of what the shell is and what's inside of it in a second, but they range in different sizes. We have, not photoed here, 2-inch shells and going 2.5, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, and 8s. And those are your most common sizes that you'll see in a commercial show. And then there's larger shells that are for bigger displays that we often do. Or sometimes do, and those can range from 12-inch to 18-inch, even 24-inch shells, and those require different what we call racking and mortaring, and you'll see what I'm talking about in some coming up slides in the presentation. So the fireworks industry is heavily regulated. Not only by the federal government, ATF, and Homeland Security, and the FBI. There's a number of background checks and things that you have to go through in order to become a licensed operator. And then there's also the state. Next slide. And the state has a number of different registered seals that they put on every single piece of fireworks, a fireworks device or piece of product, as we call it in the industry. And there's different types of pyrotechnics out there, not just the 1.3 G, but we have 1.4, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you have, going from left to right, you have just dangerous fireworks, and that's going to be your 1.3 commercial grade fireworks. You have safe and sane, which are the 1.4, which are some of the things that you can buy in some of the counties in the state of California that stay to the ground and have a low distribution of powder in them and volatility, explosive volatility. Then there's agricultural pyrotechnics, and there's devices made that different agricultural farmers use to scare off wildlife from damaging crops. And then you have your snap caps and snappers, and right now you can see those in the stores like Safeway, CVS, and they're selling those little packets of where you pop it and the confetti shoots out, and then the snap caps that you throw on the ground and they pop. All of those, if you look at them, have a little tiny version of that seal that says snap caps and snappers, excuse me, on them, just because they do contain a very small amount of black powder. Next slide. So what's the composition, or what's inside of a fireworks shell? And the most common, these are the two common types that we have. We have the Italian style shell, just because they're mainly made in Italy and in Europe. And then we have the Asian style shell or a Chinese style shell because in China is a heavy producer of pyrotechnic devices and firework shells. So that is the difference, two different styles of shells. Um, we'll start with the Asian style shell. And what happens is that the fuse gets lit, and this fuse starts burning, and it goes down all the way to the bottom into what we call a lift charge. And that's basically black powder. And dependent on the size of the shell is how much black powder is put in there to propel it to the appropriate height in order for the shell to break. And this is a science and an art. I have so much respect for the people who make the shells. I've been to different different what the word I'm looking for, meetings and trade shows where there's a big one in Arizona out at Lake Havasu, and it shows how they make the shells, and it's truly fascinating how they do it. And so that lift charge gets lit, and then it lights a time delay fuse. And depending on the length of that fuse, it allows enough time for the shell to propel, up into the sky. Then it lights what's a bursting charge. And that bursting charge is what lights the rest, is what breaks the shell and also ignites those round stars, they're called, number 5. There's all stars, and those are just rolled um, stars with different types of chemicals that make different effects and colors and noises and sounds that are inside of the shell. And then once those are ignited, that's what you see in the different designs of the shell. Then you have, and these two shells, by the way, are called a single break shell. They only break once. So on the left side, we have the Italian style shell, and it's just shaped differently. And the same thing is with, it goes down, and unlike the Asian style shell, the time delay fuse and the lift charge are lit at the same time. So the science has really got to be right here, that we make sure we get that thing up in the high enough in the sky before that time delay fuse hits that bursting charge and then ignites the stars, which then causes the display. It's a much riskier shell just because of the fact that the initial match and time delay are lit at the same time. Now that black match that's at the top, where the fuse burns extremely fast. It burns at about 100 feet per second. So there's not a lot of time for when the second you light that and it goes. There is a little bit what we call visco on that can delay it a little bit if you are hand firing to get out of the way. But typically we skip the visco and just go straight to it, just so we can get those straight up into the sky as fast as possible. And you'll see that as we get a little closer and further on in the presentation. So let's take a look now inside a cutaway of the shell. Next slide, please. So on the right side is you have the Asian or Chinese style shell. And you can see up at the top there is the fuse, the match that's going down into the lift charge. And then it hits that time delay fuse, and it's going to go up and it's going to hit that first ring, that larger ring right there. And that's the first breaking or burst. And then it's going to continue to go up and hit that next burst. And it's going to have a multi-burst. So you're going to see two rings per se of different colors and different compositions. And that's called a multi-break shell. Now up at the top, it looks like it's wearing a little hat, and that's called a tail. And whenever you've seen a firework go up into the sky and you can see like it looks like a comet shooting through, that's a tail. And so that's a tail effect, so you can track. And it's just an artist, just a neat feature that happens on the shell. Then we have on the left-hand side is the Italian style shell. And this is a multi-break. This is a triple break shell. And what's going to happen is, again, it lights from the top. So it's going to hit that lift charge down at the bottom, get up into the sky, then hit that top braking charge, and which is going to propel those round stars. And then that lift charge will hit that second time delay fuse, and then hit that second braking charge, which will then cause the square stars to propel, which then hits a third time delay fuse. And that silvery material is most likely an aluminum or a titanium solute. And we call that the chemical used or compound is a titanium or aluminum. And that causes that large bang that you feel in your chest when a shell breaks. That big boom that sets off all the car alarms. That's the boom that we're talking about, and that's what that silver is down at the bottom. Okay, next slide. So this is what it looks like inside of some of those more creative shells. So the one on the left is a star shell. So the shell maker has put enough breaking powder in there and has initially put the stars in a shape of to break in the style of a star when it gets up into the sky. Now, in theory, it looks great, and sometimes it doesn't always work out that way and doesn't always look out to be like a star. That's why we shoot multiple of them at one time. That hopes that 1 out of 3 will be good and come out to what it should be look like. But they've gotten a lot better, and most of them are pretty accurate. And then on the right, you have a smiley face. And although the smiley faces are pretty good, getting the smiley face to be perfectly looking and not upside down uh, is also kind of out of our hands once it leaves that mortar tube and gets up into the sky. But that's what they look like from the inside of the cutaway. Next slide. And then hopefully once they go up, this is what we're looking at, and this is what we're hoping for once they get up into the sky. Next slide. So there's a lot of different types of shells out there. These are just some of the most common ones that you'll see. Up at the top there, a brocade crown, chrysanthemum, crackle, a crosset, a coconut, comets, dahlias, and they have some very unique names. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just reaching for, like, for example, like I have a show, obviously 4th of July show, and it says silver strobe willow, half blue and silver chrysanthemum with half silver and blue pastille. So that's obviously a multi-break, which has a bunch of different effects going on in it. So it's there's a lot of very unique names that they're called, like a golden coconut, silver bees, lots of really a tornado, a red tail to whistle. So a lot of very unique names, and when you see them and you're putting them in the show. But like I said, a lot of common ones: waterfall, time rain, a willow, a strobe effect, snowflakes, a spiral, a bunch of different peonies are extremely common in the show. Next slide. So how do we get them up into the sky? And the way we get them up into the sky is we have what's called our mortar racks. And if you look from left to right, the first shells are closest to us. If you're looking at the photo, looks like 6-inch shells, 6 or 8s, and they're in a mortar tube. And depending on the size of the shell, is this different length of tube. And all of those tubes are made out of a material called, some of them, but those larger shells are made of a compound or plastic type material called HDPE. And HDPE, basically, if something were to go, we were have a catastrophe or something goes wrong, it's not going to shoot splinters out per se. The plastic is made to withstand the blast, and rather than splinter or shatter, it just breaks. And it doesn't, and it just cracks, but it does not completely come apart or shoot splinters or any type of debris out. And the wood is made and treated in a way to where it will handle the blast also, and those racks will just break apart they're put together with nails. But it's far and few between when you do have some type of catastrophe or misfire like that. Down in the middle photo, you'll see that some of those tubes are made of a very thick cardboard, and that is appropriate under the state mandates the fireworks industry under the fire code, state fire marshal code of Title 19. And Title 19 says that it's okay to use paper tubing, thick paper, very thick paper tubing for a 2-inch or 2.5-inch shell. You'll see a mixture there of HDPE and paper tubing and in those racks. And sometimes we cover the racks with cardboard. And the reason being is because you can see kind of, TJ, if you're able to point it out there for me, there's little yellow going in between the tops of the tubes there. And those are fuses, the black match fuse. And basically that is what's called a finale chain. And so what you see there is those 10 in a row, those 10 in a row will go up in about 1 second. And so everything you see there, and there's what, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, there's about 40 there times 8, that's 320, 30. Yeah, there's a lot of shells right there, and that's all going to go up in about 10 seconds. Just with that, though, you got to remember that black fuse is traveling at 100 feet per second. So that's part of that's just part of a finale. That's not all of it for some larger shows. Now, if we go all the way over to the right, those are those 12s and 16s and 18s I'm talking about. That's a show that we did in Arizona. And we have to actually bring in heavy equipment and bury the mortar tubes into the earth and then lower the shells down into those mortars and wire them. So that's how we get those up into the sky. Next slide. So here we have a picture of a operator, and he is handling the shell and he is lowering it down into the mortar tube. Next slide. Once he gets it lowered all the way down, he's going to do what's called a safety tie-off and a strain relief tie-off. So should something happen and a shell leaves, it doesn't accidentally pull that shell out of the mortar. And then continuing on the photo on the left, you see the state fire marshal sticker there. And then on that other shell right below it, you see a 37B. And we'll talk about that. That's an address. That shell is addressed because this show is computer choreographed. And so in order for that shell to go at the appropriate time, we will have to make sure that we are putting it in the appropriate mortar tube and plugging it in, as you can see onto the left there, the appropriate channel in the computer's firing systems board. So that way when it's appropriate for that shell to go in the show, the computer sends a charge to that channel and that shell will then go up. So a choreographed show takes more time to lay out versus a hand-fired or non-choreographed show. But a lot of shows nowadays are choreographed to music. And in regards to setup, the comment, well, how long does it take to set it up, Pete? Well, dependent on the show, you're looking at about an hour to an hour and a half of setup time per minute of show. And then takedown time is probably about 30 minutes to an hour. So a 15-minute show at 9 o'clock at night, your crew is probably there at 8 in the morning, and they're probably leaving at 2 in the morning or 11 midnight, depending on how large the show is and so forth. So it makes for a very, very long day to do these shows. Next slide. So how high do they go? Typically, it's 100 feet per inch in height and about 75 feet per inch of braking. We just like to keep the math simple, and extra safety. So we do 100 and 100. So if it's going up 100 feet, we want to have 100 feet breakout. And that's how the diameter of the shell breaking. So a simple 2-inch or 3-inch shell is going to go 300 feet in the air, but have about a 300, roughly close to a 300-foot breaking point too, diameter up in the sky. And we have what's called a fallout safety zone. And so we'll add an additional 75 feet to our largest shell. And that means that nobody can be in that fallout zone. So if we're shooting the largest shell is 5-inch shell, we'll have a 575-foot or 600-foot fallout zone where nobody can be in that zone. And we have to, that's determines basically, how large of a shell someone can put in their show. We'll have a lot of clients come to us and say, I want, big fireworks. Well, where are you planning on having your show? And we have to take a look at it and see your fallouts and measure, and then come back to the client and say, well, this is the largest shell that we can legally shoot and safely shoot. Being in California, there's lots of things you're looking at. You're looking at, very dry, and making sure that we take appropriate steps to prevent setting a fire or a wildland fire. We don't want to do that. That's the last thing we want to do. Next slide. So how do we get them up in the sky once we got them into that tube? And there's several methods, and one of the, what I want to call old school method, is hand firing. And hand firing still happens today. We still do some hand fired shows, and there's two tools that we use. One on the left is called a fusee, and it's a simple road flare. And then there's the other one, it's a propane torch. And both are able to, you hit the black match, and then the shell will go. And I'll have a video later in the presentation showing you a hand-fired shell. I personally prefer a propane torch just because there's more control to it. I can turn it on or off if needed, put it down if there's an emergency or something I need to take care of. But both methods work. It's just dependent on the operator who's sending the fireworks or lighting the fireworks. Next slide. Now we get into the more technology part of it, and this is what's called an electronic match or an e-match. And basically it's just a piece of sulfur inside of a tube, and when it lights, it sends a flame into a bucket that hits that black match and then lights that fuse and sends the shell and starts the process. And there's different lengths of e-match, 3 meters, 6 meters, 9 meters, and you can run that match back. And that's what you saw in the previous video of that operator wiring up. He was using an e-match, and those are typically used in electronically fired shows and choreographed shows. So those are safer, obviously, because you can be 100 feet away, 200 feet away, and use those in your firing system. Next slide. Now in firing systems, one of the older firing systems, but still used to this day, is a traditional pin, board, and rail system. And basically what it is, it's a battery operated system, and the operator is taking that red pin there that you see, TJ, if you can highlight that out, and then they're basically touching the screw heads, and those are all different channels. And it's not necessarily a choreographed show to the style of shell or whatnot. It's the shells are put in different mortars and just plugged into the rail that you see that's on the ground in the photo to the right. But the pyrotechnician can still do a choreographed show to it. They're listening to the music a couple seconds prior than what the audience is hearing, so that they have enough time to hit that screw head, complete the circuit, and send that shell, so that way the shell breaks at that beat. So it's an old school way before we got into computerized systems, but that's how it worked in the past. With the operator was basically hitting those screw heads and listening to the music a couple seconds behind the audience. Next slide. Now we get into the technology part of it. Things have come a long way. This is a system that we commonly use at Fireworks and Stage Effects America. This is a system made by Cobra Firing Systems. It is a wireless mesh system, which means the different modules, the yellow case there that you see is called a firing module, and the one on the left in that is the black one, is a remote control that talks to that yellow firing module, and all the shells that are E-match get plugged into those different channels that you see there. That's at 18M, which means there's 18 channels. And then, or circuits, and we have 36M, 72Ms, so multiple circuits depending on the size of the show that we're doing. And the mesh network means that when we set up a module, it acts as a repeater, so it boosts the signal. So the signal creates this like network, its own private network, and builds up and boosts that signal so we can have multiple firing locations. So if we're at a theme park or a festival or something, and the client wants multiple breaks from multiple different areas of the in the show, we can have these set up amongst different areas of the location to do that. Then on the right photo, that is called the Cobra Command Center. Anybody old enough to remember G.I. Joe? It's a thrill for pyrotechnics. I have my Cobra Command Center, and the G.I. Joe nerd comes out for a second. But that is a computer-based system, and Cobra has software that allows us to program a choreographed show and use a tablet and see in more detail what our 18M or firing modules are doing, how they're communicating, what their battery levels are, what shells have fired, where we are in the show. An enormous amount of features and control over the show itself. And there's different softwares that we use that then take the choreographed show from our choreographers. We have some very talented choreographers in the company, and they will then load it into the different software piece and download it, and then it goes into the 18R2 or the Cobra Command Center, and it communicates that choreography and to the different 18Ms or modules to fire the show as it was choreographed by our choreographers. Next slide. So this is an example of that software. This is a software that's heavily used called Finale 3D. And what we'll do is we'll set up our different positions that we have. You see down the bottom, position 1, 2, 3, and goes up to 9. And then there's music track on the bottom of anybody who's ever used a music mixing software. And the operator, the choreographer, is able to plug in, you know, the type of shell, the angle, the duration, the size, and the computer knows exactly if he or she wants that shell to break at that note or that beat. How many seconds does it take for the computer to then fire prior? So all that is figured out from the computer. It makes our life a lot easier. And the amazing thing is that some of these choreographed shows can cost a lot of money. So next slide. We now have the ability, you know, if a client is paying, you know, upwards of $50, $60, $100,000 for a show, we can then, we can design it, choreograph it, and see what it looks like, and then take it and show it to our client and say, this is what your show is going to look like. And they can see it prior to it happening for the audience. And they can give feedback. They can say, oh, we want more of this, or, you know, our company colors are, you know, orange and blue or red and green, and we want to see more of those colors. And we can do that, and we can tweak it for them. And we use the software in more highly technical, choreographed, high-end shows, and you'll see a wonderful example of this technology and this computer system and programming in use, and the Cobra system, along with another system that's used called Digital in a video coming later on in this presentation. Next slide. So this is a quick video of what a hand-fired and electronically fired show looks like from the operator's point of view. This is a show that I did at the Salinas County Fair a couple years ago. And it's basically shot from a GoPro that I was wearing on my chest, and I'm firing some stuff from a remote control 18R2 Cobra remote, and then I have a line of hand fire operators that I'm just keeping them on timing and so forth. So go ahead and you can play it, TJ. Is there sound or I don't?
You okay?
Oh, there we go.
I have another torch right here. Need it.
So the operators are watching, you know, themselves and seeing where they are in line, who's firing what and when, and they know, okay, when the person to my right goes, then I need to go.
Okay, we're at 6:15. 6:15.
The different time calls are letting them know where they should be in the show, in the shoot. We use glow sticks that are on the ground, and they know that's time markers, so they know where they. When I say halfway, they know that they either have to pick up the pace a little bit, or where they should be.
Okay, should almost be halfway.
That they need to be to that marker.
We're good on time. We're good on time.
And you can see there, I'm firing a couple of shells from the remote. We don't want to have what's called dark sky. And what dark sky is where there's nothing happening for a couple seconds. And the audience is sitting there, will the show over or what's happening? So if there's a misstep or the timing gets off for some reason within the hand fire operators, I have a set of shells set aside that I call dark sky shells, and I'm able to fill the sky until my team gets back on timing, or you'll just have multiple shells in the sky, but just to prevent that dark sky from occurring. Next slide. All right, so now let's get into the world of theatrical close proximity. You know, this is a completely different world of pyrotechnics. And theatrical close proximity pyrotechnics are primarily used in indoor and outdoor settings. So you'll see them in concert venues. If you're a wrestling WWE fan, you see a lot of pyrotechnics going off. You'll see them at concerts. You'll see them at live sporting events outside. And these basically allow the pyrotechnic device to be fired at a very close proximity to the artist or to the performer or to the football player. And they are rated at 1.4 gram, 1.4 G, but they are still extremely dangerous, mainly because of the volatility of you could hurt somebody because somebody is so close, basically, to them. And in order to be, I'm a if you heard Emily earlier, I'm just a trainee. So I had to apply. I'm getting like feedback in my headset here, TJ. Okay, now it's gone. So I had to apply for just a trainee license, and I have to work under a licensed theatrical operator. And there's very few in the state. There's, I think, only 68 licensed people in the state of California that can use this level of product. So it's a very, very small field of operators, whereas I think there's about 300 commercial operators in the state. So it's a very small, narrow field, and there's only about 150, I believe, of us theatrical trainees in the state. But the way they work is not uncommon from the commercials, the little spirals that you see that looks like a pigtail, the wire, that is an e-match that's built into the device, and it immediately lights the lift charge that sends not so much stars, but other granules that will go up into the sky to cause the effect that we're looking for. And they're basically thicker than a paper towel tube, and they range in size and diameter. You can see a 3-inch down to a 3/4 inch, but the little bit of product that they do have, like the larger one, the 3-inch, will shoot an effect 200 feet in the sky. And there's some that will shoot 300 feet or 75 feet. And there's multiple different effects that there are. There's mines, gerbs, and so forth that have different time effects, time delays. You'll have like a gerb that will rain down a different color type of pyrotechnic effect for 45 seconds, or it's a single shot, 1 second for 65 feet up in the sky. So there's a number of different types of effects that are out there that are used in the theatrical environment. Next slide. Next slide. So here is a set of all these photos, by the way, and everything that you're seeing are property of Fireworks and Stage Effects America, and are our actual clients that we do work for. So this is a setup that I did at Spartans San Jose State game at SFU Stadium, and that's a setup for what it looks like when they do a touchdown. And we have to use close proximity product there because we don't have the fallout like we would for the commercial, because that's right on the backside of the stand. So I have, fans in those stands watching the show, the game, and then I can't have anything falling on them. So I have a 0 fallout zone. So that's why we have to use close proximity product. The next slide will show you what that looks like. Go ahead and play that video, TJ. Those are basically what we're doing there, and they score a touchdown. We get a cue from the announcer, and then we hit it, and it's but those are comets that go up into the sky. Next slide. This is an example of their intro, and we're using comets, mines, and gerbs in this, and you'll see just how safe it is and how close the talent, as we call them, whether they're an athlete or a speaker from a CEO to a company, they're all given the label of talent. So you can see how close the talent is to the actual product. Okay, next slide. So that was one effect, you see, and another one of our clients is UC Berkeley. You'll see this is an effect that, because it's a small effect, we can put these theatrical effects almost anywhere. These are mounted on the end of a flagpole, and that's a gerb. And basically what that 1S65 means, it's going to be a 1 second shot that's going to go 65 feet in the air. And you can see there's always an arrow on all of those pieces of product to signify which direction they fire. Let's go to the next slide in video. Okay, next slide. So everyone who is involved in or going to be near the pyrotechnic device goes through a safety training. We have a meeting and a rehearsal with that talent, in making sure they are fully aware of how to operate the device if they're firing it. So for example, in that video UC Berkeley, the cheerleaders are actually firing their gerbs. And we go through a rehearsal and we train them and show them the safety aspects of it, what to do if there's a problem. Um, and then also with talent like in rock shows or concerts, we show and make sure that the talent knows exactly where the product is. And we have to make sure that, you know, although that artist is jumping into the air and he wants product to go off at that moment, if he is not safe, we don't fire it. You know, it's not risk injuring him or harming him. So unfortunately, that effect wouldn't go off if the operator felt that that artist or talent was in danger. So you have to make that split-second decision to fire or not to fire. And that's why we have rehearsals and training sessions with the talent who are going to be near the product. Next slide. This is just another photo of a show we did with a chandelier falling, landing on the piano, and signifying electrical sparks flying. Next slide. Now, what's happened is we've married the two arts. And I say arts between commercial and theatrical, and we brought them together to make some amazing shows. And these shows allow for the audience to be in the experience and a more depth experience. So not only are they seeing a huge aerial show in front of them, but they're having product and things going off around them. And you'll see this now, like Disney does it, Great America does it, and there's other artists and clients that we have that have begun doing this, other theme parks down south that have begun doing this. To bring these two types of art together and pyrotechnics devices together to create some pretty amazing shows. Next slide. This is an example of that. A couple of years ago out at Great America, we had a combination of theatrical product up on that Sky Tower ride, if you're familiar with. So we had a bunch of theatrical product on there to cause that effect. And then we had theatrical product on the rooftops, and then we had aerial commercial product farther outside of the park to create an amazing effect. And that Cobra system, as I talked about, creates that mesh network of all those controllers talking to each other, because we have those other controllers way up on top of that Sky Tower ride to make sure that everything's in communication and that our computers are talking and firing the show as it was choreographed. Next slide. So another beautiful example in timing and working with the artist and marrying the two theatrical and commercial pyrotechnics together was done by, we were very fortunate to work with The Weeknd, the 2020 AMAs. And this just really shows the choreography, not only with the camera and the production team and the artists being The Weeknd, what effects he wanted and how, when I drop my hand, I want this to go. And when the camera pans, I want to see a shell break. So it hours and hours and hours of, you know, planning and rehearsing just to get this 3-minute production. And I'm very proud of this. We have a wonderful team, and I'd like to, one of the most beautiful and best examples of marrying the two, both the theatrical and commercial product and pyrotechnics. Right, so with that, I will kick it back over to Emily for
Absolutely.
Q&A. I'm sorry, about 8 minutes or so left, 7, but we'll
Absolutely. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A and we can line those up. But that's a great video, Pete, to end on. I was seeing so much chatter in the chat there about how awesome the synchronization, the effects, the timing, the, knowing what goes on in the background to make that happen when you see a show like that is very cool to see. We do have a few questions to start, but please, if anyone else thinks of a question, go ahead and type it in the Q&A. Someone had a question about the black special tubes that you talked about that you put the shells into. Are those one-time use only, or are they reusable?
No, they're reusable. There's HDPE, heavy duty plastic resin material. There is at the bottom of the tube, there is a wood plug. And so we have to do safety inspections and make sure that that wood is not cracked or damaged or too burnt or anything like that. And the same with the paper tubes, we do a safety inspection. So after we complete a show, our equipment goes back to 1 or 2 yards that we have in the state of California, and they get inspected by our teams at the yards. And then when the equipment comes on site, it's my responsibility to make sure I do a safety inspection of that equipment and repair it if I can on site prior to using it.
Absolutely. I'm starting to see drones used in aerial light displays. Can drones be combined with fireworks for a show?
They can. We have talked to some of those, and there was a good example during the inauguration. President Biden, you saw a very beautiful display of the technology, drone technology, and fireworks, pyrotechnics. It's just the distances and how close they can be to each other, because even though if the device hits one of those drones, it's like, I'll tell the drone company, we'll sign this. I'm not liable. There's something. Oops. Yeah. We had 20, 18 came back.
Great. What kind of protective gear do you wear when firing these shows? It must get pretty loud, for example.
Yeah. So we will wear earplugs, hard hats, safety glasses, masks, or balaclavas, fire retardant masks. We'll also wear firefighter gear. So a firefighter jacket, if you saw in the video for the hand fire show, all those operators were wearing firefighter turnout gear. So yeah, we wear jeans, obviously, steel-toed boots, cotton material, leather gloves.
Absolutely. How long does it take you to learn everything needed for this work? Do you go to school or apprentice? You mentioned a trainee for the theatrical side.
Yeah, so this isn't exactly something that you can look on, LinkedIn and find a job for. It's basically really who you know and that you know somebody who's in the industry. And then you get brought in by that licensed operator and you apprentice under them. In the state of California, you have to apprentice under 5 different operators in a 2-year period and complete 8 shows. And then once you get that done, you have to submit what's called a post-display report. 8 of those post-display reports, along with 5 letters of recommendation. And then you go into the vetting process with the state, and then they give you the ability to test and take a written test to get your license. So it's really an industry of who you know, and you get brought in to it that way.
Absolutely. We have another question about the firework design itself that you showed in some of the early slides. The question is, why is the tail on top of the firework instead of the bottom of the firework to make that streak when it goes up in the air?
Because, very good question. And the reason being is because the bottom of the shell is primarily lift charge. It's almost like a paper sack per se, with a plastic sack inside. With black powder or gunpowder that creates the lift charge or that explosion. So we can't put the tail there. So they put the tail on the top. And when that fuse lights, it lights that small tail in addition to the lift charge.
That's great. That's great. How did you get interested in becoming a pyrotechnician?
So previous, before being a safety guy, I had a career in theme park entertainment and worked closely with the pyrotechnic crew out there in a couple different productions, and just became friends with them. And that's how I got brought in. One of my very good friends became a license operator, and then he was building his crew, and he brought me in, and I started apprenticing under him.
Very cool. How are new kinds of fireworks invented?
It's an art. And there's different production companies out there, or companies that produce them, both across different countries and in the United States. And it's just really an art of the different types of effects that they put together, both in the consumer grade world and in the commercial world level of product, 1.3, 1.4 product.
Absolutely. I remember the first time I saw the smiley face firework going, whoa, mind blowing. Looks so new. And now they're all over, but someone invented it at some point.
Yeah. And then they get mass produced and everything, and somebody creates something. And I go to in Arizona, it's called Winter Blast. And it's in Lake Havasu, and it's a big conference. And you can take different seminars. You can learn how to build a shell, and then there's professional builders out there that will produce these shells, and we sit there and we watch give the long name of what it is, and it'll go up and go off. We're like, whoa, and there's different companies doing demonstrations of new product coming out and so forth.
Very cool. All right, well, I think that wraps up our questions for today. Thank you again, Pete, for sharing your knowledge and your clear passion for this topic. This has been just incredible to see the art, the technology, the artistry, the precision and the safety all wrapped up into one. And to those who participated today, thank you so much for coming out and joining this evening's webinar. We especially want to thank our members for supporting the Tech Interactive. You make webinars like this possible. And add our thanks to Fireworks and Stage FX America for the shows that we got to see this evening. That's a very cool piece as well of what's going on here.